Hey Colts fans, I'm JJ Stankevitz, and welcome in to another episode of the Colts Show, an Indianapolis Colts podcast. We are presented by our friends at Microsoft Surface Copilot Plus PC. Coming up on today's episode, I had a chance to have a really good conversation with Jourdan Rodrigue, senior writer from The Athletic. She wrote a feature profile on Carlie Irsay-Gordon that went out in late December, and then she and Zach Kiefer co-bylined a story in The Athletic that went out on Tuesday as an explainer as to why Carlie Irsay-Gordon, Colts owner and CEO, decided to retain general manager Chris Ballard and head coach Shane Steichen. Wanted to pick her brain on her perspective on that, kind of deliver that to you guys. I know the episode's coming out a little bit later in the week than it usually does. We wanted to make sure we could get Jourdan on here to have a nice, interesting discussion about the direction the Colts are going now that they have decided to keep Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen in their current posts. Without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Jourdan Rodrigue from The Athletic. It is my pleasure to be welcomed here on the Colts Show by Jourdan Rodrigue, senior NFL writer for The Athletic, co-host of the NFL Daily podcast with Greg Rosenthal. You can get that wherever you get your podcasts. And Jourdan is on this podcast because she wrote two outstanding stories about Carlie Irsay-Gordon. The first was a feature story that went out on The Athletic on December 30th with the headline, "All Eyes Are on the NFL's Most Atypical Owner. Where will her curiosity lead her next?" A fantastic profile of Carlie Irsay-Gordon as her role as owner and CEO of the Colts. And then Jourdan and Zach Kiefer wrote a story on Tuesday of this week behind Carlie Irsay-Gordon's decision to give GM Chris Ballard one last shot. So bringing Jourdan on to talk about Carlie Irsay-Gordon. Really excited for this conversation. Jourdan, thanks for coming on the pod.
Thank you so much for having me. And also, thank you to Indianapolis and the Colts for having me in the first week of December. I had such a warm, not temperature-wise, it was very cold, but I had such a warm experience, and everybody was very gracious with their time. The city was buzzing because the Hoosiers were about to play, and it was so much fun to be there at that time. So very, very appreciative for my time there.
So Jourdan, you spent, I think it was 4 days here in Indianapolis, is that right?
7 days.
Okay, a whole week here.
Yeah.
You spent reporting on the story that went out on December 30th, and you were in the building, you were talking to a ton of people. This was leading up to, unfortunately for us, the Jaguars game, where Daniel Jones sustained a torn Achilles. But what did maybe you return from that mountain of reporting that you did, and the avalanche of interviews that you conducted? When you got home and you sat down to start really thinking about where this story is going to go, what maybe hit your brain first about Carlie Irsay-Gordon and what you learned about her as the owner and CEO of this franchise?
Well, for me, it was how everything felt, right? Now, caveat here, it was not post Jacksonville Jaguars game, so everything, the world was sort of wide open still to the Colts. I think when you have a quarterback injury like that, it can rock a building in more ways than people would see from the outside. But at that time, it was like, this is what the Colts would look like without that injury, right? And so when I was there, I was really interested in pursuing this theory that I had because I had encountered, from the second that I had heard of Carlie Irsay-Gordon, I was really interested in pursuing this theory that I kept hearing pop up from executives that I've talked to that have crossed paths with her, whether it's at league meetings or in other aspects of the league calendar, with coaches, including ones that she had interviewed prior to hiring Shane Steichen. There was a lot of the same theme that kept emerging, which is this person is very, very special. And, at the time, obviously talking about her before the death of Jim Irsay, it was, when it is her time to lead, this could be different. This could be something that takes the franchise in a direction that's very, very interesting. This is a person who is ready to build a very modern, yet also very holistic and warm family-run feeling of what could be possible for NFL ownership in the league, and certainly doing so at a very young age. And so I was very curious about that, and I'm like, okay, everybody seems to be big fans of Carlie Irsay-Gordon, so I'm curious about her. And so when I went into the building, I wanted to just understand what everything felt like, and how she spoke and how she asks questions. That was one of my main questions, was how, when she asks you a question, like, how does she ask the question? I came away with this, even before speaking with Carlie, this sentiment of like speciality that was, I don't think a lot of people could see yet from the outside, and maybe we'll get a chance to in the future, where there was a really high level of football IQ permeating the building. Kind of knew that already from some of the reputations of the scouts and some of the people in the building, the coaching. There was this high level of emotional intelligence too. When I was in the locker room talking to players, we ranged from everything from talking about, X's and O's to talking about really high level societal things that had come up for them over the course of the year, because of the ownership transition, and also the scrutiny that the organization has faced because of that transition and in light of that transition. And I was really impressed by how much that building holds at any given time. And I started to really understand that that is reflective of Carlie and the way that she attacks the world and pursues ideas, and the curiosity that she approaches everything with. And when I met her, I was fortunate to get some time with her as well at the end of the week. And I was really blown away by the energy. And I've been around a lot of coaches, a lot of GMs, a lot of owners in the last 10 years covering the league. And she very specifically reminded me of some of these very high level coaches, not necessarily the topics, but the aura, or like the energy, because you could feel that it was like this barely contained like drive that was sort of buzzing, making the room buzz a little bit. But it was also very focused, very direct, very immersed in the person sitting right in front of her. In this case, it was me. And it reminds me of that like laser beam that like Sean McVay hits you with sometimes, or that laser beam that Kyle Shanahan hits you with sometimes, that it's like this crazy singular directiveness that it's very hard to explain. I did my best in the story, but it is something that I think it's a life force in a way for a building that's on the precipice of what comes next.
I think something that you included in the article, the feature story, that I thought was really important was the idea of Carlie operating with curiosity, but without judgment or jumping to conclusions. Why was that an important line for you to include in that story through your conversations, either with Carlie or with people close to her?
Well, first of all, I felt it from her, because it was like we were back and forth. She was asking me stuff. We were having a conversation in a way that felt less like an interview and more like an actual, just a conversation having with somebody who just wanted to know things, which I found very refreshing. You don't get that talking to a lot of these owners, most, if not all. And so it was really interesting talking to everybody from the coaching staff to people in the front office and players, because like I mentioned, that how does she ask questions was front of mind for me. And it brought me back, their responses brought me back to a conversation I once had with a defensive coach, a prominent one who's really well known for teaching and developing players and developing culture. And we were talking about how in his role, what he wanted to be was like water in a fishbowl, where you're filling the bowl as a sustaining life force for the fish, not to drown the fish. So you're filling the room, you're filling the space with your energy, with your culture, with your vision, but you're doing so in a way that feels sustaining and not smothering. And that's what I really got from Carlie, because she's so connected with every part of the building. And some of the stories that I heard, I wish I could just write a whole separate piece on like the dozens of stories that I got from players and coaches of how they felt seen, or they felt like surprised to be so seen, but also in a way that never made them felt like they were being watched. And I'm like, being seen without feeling like you're being scrutinized or watched, that's a very rare line to walk in a results-based and production-based business that tries to quantify people into numbers and output, right? And so I found that to be extremely interesting. I found that to be so telling of why she draws the type of loyalty that she does within the building, is because she makes people feel like that without feeling threatened by that, by her title, by her presence, by that crazy intense energy that I was telling you about. Mm-hmm. Like it's almost like it never takes over for the sake of somebody else feeling centered in the conversation or in the attention.
But before we get into, because I do want to get your perspective on, what you observed through her decision-making process to retain Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen. You mentioned, talking to other owners around the league and, having these conversations. Like, how is Carlie Irsay-Gordon different in your mind than your typical NFL owner? You don't have to name names or anything, but then you're like your typical NFL owner and CEO.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, and especially too beyond the very obvious like physical elements, like she's way younger than any of them, first of all. But it's like this willingness to immerse in the building that's very different from the way that like a other family run organizations are. It's less like my office is at the top of the building and more like I'm showing up in the dark next to the assistant special teams coach because that's when we show up. That's football. And kind of being one of the people in the football building versus somebody who's over the top of the football building. It was funny when I came in, she was even, I joked with my editor. I was like, there's no way we can even explain this in the article, but she was on the Thursday liquid routine of I've seen head coaches do, which by that time it's a giant Stanley full of water and like a Celsius energy drink or vitamin energy drink or whatever. And you're just like, you've got both, right? Because balance. And like, that's how that by the time you get to Thursday, that's what you're existing on essentially, because you're game planning and you're so immersed in all of that. And so, I saw like her notes on these whiteboards of how she thinks about the business side. And I've learned about her partnership with Kaylin and running Kicking the Stigma. And I'm like, how is it possible that somebody is doing all these things at one time in a way that feels authentic? And it's a theory I had to go and test for myself. It's one thing to have someone tell you about it. It's another thing to see it with your own eyes. And so that willingness to be a part of the fabric of something versus dictating what the fabric is from on high, that is what to me really, really separates her. And it's like that balance too between she's not making decisions autonomously. She's not even really making many football decisions at all, and she's certainly never doing it by herself. But it's always that immersion, like she's getting people to the decisions and talking through the decisions in real time. And I think that's really rare. I think it'd be really easy to come over the top and try to meddle. That's not what I feel is happening here.
You know what? The other thing I really liked about your profile of her was that, the most visible thing about Carlie Irsay-Gordon this year and in years past, if folks have been looking, is her presence on the sidelines, right? It became this kind of cultural phenomenon this year because the Colts are having success and it was her first year as owner and CEO. But what I loved about your article, Jourdan, was that you didn't focus on that because that's just one part of what she does. It is certainly atypical for an owner, but in my conversations with her, it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense. That aspect of it, though, I thought you did such a good job weaving it in where it is an important part of the story, but it's not like the story, right? But when you did kind of, hit that part of it and you kind of wrote about it, though, you're writing about someone who is not only an owner being on the NFL sideline, but somebody who is a woman being on the NFL sideline. And those are two things that are not plentiful around the league. How did you kind of come to understand that aspect of her ownership and her strategy and her process?
That I really leaned on understanding through the voices of players and the voices of people through the building. Now, it is written in 4 sentences in the course of the story, but I urge people to understand like there are dozens of interviews that go into making the correct 4 sentences in the story, right? Because it is like when I talk about the emotional intelligence in the building, like it was so striking to me that in speaking about her, and by the way, I didn't ask one person about the headsets, but when you have a big, a reporter coming into your building and that that's like the thing that's going viral on the internet every week, you do bring it up if you're the subject of an interview or whatever. And what was so refreshing to me was how there's this very unique type of protectiveness that happened from these players. It was a reiteration of, by the way, like, welcome to our building. If you had been around, this has been what is going on, but in a kind of a funny, tongue-in-cheek way. But there was a protectiveness without softening her, or without like feeling like she needed someone sticking up for her, or without like patronizing her in any way. And I think it would have been so easy to fall into that protectiveness, like white knight kind of thing. And that's actually not what happened here. It was like, she's one of us, so we're explaining this to you. And okay, people need to understand this. And I think for for like, not, as a woman, first of all, to hear that was incredible, because I'm sitting there thinking like, this could have gone so many other directions, and societally often has. But instead, what it was like, this is of us. This is not strange. This is something that we know as a part of our fabric, because she is a part of our fabric. We expect her in our meeting rooms. Her presence is expected at this point. We expect her on the headset. And there was this really refreshing, like, nobody tried to like matronize her. Everyone talked about her in one of the most refreshing, because there's so many dynamics here, JJ. It is, yes, she is a woman in football. Yes, she is the youngest owner by far, and so as are her sisters. Yes, she is also in the headset, and she's very visibly involved in ways that are more attuned to curiosity, less so. She's never speaking in the headset, for example. She's always just listening and taking notes. There's so many societal, she is the owner of the team. She is a billionaire. There's so many societal intersections that could have led to a number of different ways that people responded or spoke about this. And instead, the way that people spoke about it to a person in the building was so modern and refreshing, and, like I said, emotionally advanced. And like, it was so cool. Like, I left feeling like this is it. This is the way, like, it was very, very cool. And so to describe all of that, I don't even think I did a good job describing it just now, but to describe all of that in a way that's like, it shouldn't be central to the conversation. What should be central to the conversation is what she's absorbing through that process, and how it's shaping her decision making through that process, less so the optics of it. And I think that in itself, we're not talking about the optics of less so of a woman, on a sideline and what she looks like and all these things. We're talking about what's actually happening, and jumping immediately into what's actually happening was so cool. And like I said, to a person, these players and these coaches and these scouts and these assistant executives and everybody, it was like incredibly refreshing to understand how high the EQ of that building is.
So, Jourdan, kind of knowing what you know about how not only Carlie Irsay-Gordon operates, but how this organization operates, what was your reaction to the news that the Colts are going to retain general manager Chris Ballard and head coach Shane Steichen for 2026?
Yeah, I got to be honest, I wasn't as surprised as I think some people were, not just, and I want to say not just because of being there, but also looking around the landscape of the league and in my role covering the NFL for The Athletic. I'll get to that part in a second, because I do think it's a contextually a pretty important detail of why this decision was made, or why I believe this decision was made the way that it was. But first and foremost, like, I interviewed Chris a couple of times about Carlie, and I mean, Chris, very honest, sometimes to a fault, right? And very introspective and very open. And so he was, even when things were going well at that time, which I wanted to reiterate a couple of times to readers, like, this is the time when we were actually speaking, was before that week 14 game. And he was still introspective about his future. And I got the sense that conversations had already taken place about where he needed to improve, that ownership especially had had multiple conversations with him already about where process needed to get better, where decision making had to improve, what was required and what was needed in order to take the next step forward as an organization, versus like kind of wallowing in medium for another year. And you can't control an injury to a quarterback, of course, but at the same time, like, he was very open still about, and at some point he was saying, I'm paraphrasing a little, but he's saying at some point they might let me go. And I'm a realist about that. I can't do my job scared, right? Because that's pointless. But you have to understand, like, this might happen to you if you sit at 500 for forever. It's a results-based business. And I know Shane has spoken publicly about that as well. And I think so for me at the time, I was like, everything seems like it's going pretty good and you're still thinking about this. So I think that's like I was pretty 50-50 by the time, it came to her making the decision, right? So then I'm looking around the league as well, and I'm thinking, you know, this is not really the year to need a head coach unless you would like to bring in like a very experienced retread candidate. And obviously John Harbaugh coming loose has sort of shaken up the league a little bit. But this is, in terms of the overall cycle, like this is not a good year to need a head coach. If you can understand the potential of the person you do have in your building, and I think Shane Steichen has a very, very high ceiling, why would you try to replace that with an unknown quantity, essentially, and start over building scheme, building process from scratch? Something that she said to me is a multi-year process, which I agree with very much, seeing a lot of turnovers myself in my time. Like, it does take time to develop as a coach. So if you can't immediately think of what would take that and improve it, and instead you see a high level of potential and you understand the effort that would go into rebuilding again at the coaching level, to me that seems like an obvious. Of course you keep him, and they like him, and players like him, and he can run a really solid offense. And so I think that was, to me, a little bit more of a no-brainer. With Chris, what I don't think people quite contextualized, and by the way, I understand fans being angry. Like, I'm coming in, I'm not a fan of the team. I'm just coming in with my humble opinion as an outside / somewhat inside observer here. Like, a lot of people around the league really respect this front office, and a lot of people around the league, it's not so much Chris, who I think has a lot of respect in himself by people around the league, but a lot of people look at the depth of the executive staff and the scouting staff below Chris, and they think that is a deep roster. Like, that is a lot of talent. There's a lot of really long time evolved and built out process here. Scouting in itself is a very specific language. You have to build the dictionary first before you can start putting words together in it. And so that takes a ton of time. The number one reason, to me, truly bad teams stay bad is because they keep turning those departments over, and they don't take long enough. First of all, if they don't make the right decision in the first place, and second of all, if they keep turning those departments over, that jumbles up the language. You're incongruous with how you want to try to identify talent and build a team, and then it's just nobody's really understanding each other on the same talent evaluation level, right? So I think that's part of it. I also think that the stakes, I believe her when she says the stakes are really, really high. Not doing an extension, having it becoming like kind of a prove it year for both of these guys after, the very, very high hopes of the start of the season descended into disappointment. I think that is a very telling and important piece of this for impatient fans to think about. It's not rushing to make a decision. The lack of decision, in fact, it might seem like a decision was made, but to me, it feels like not a lack of decision. It feels like waiting. It feels like a little bit more patience, gathering more data before making a decision. That's what I see on the outside as it pertains to, I guess if you want to call it a decision, to not move on from either one of those guys.
When Carlie talked about, there's this high sense of urgency, I think you kind of just spoke on it, but she also talked about, expecting that Chris and Shane can replicate the success this team had over the first 10 weeks. That was with Daniel Jones being completely healthy. Daniel told us on Monday he expects to be back by the start of training camp with the Achilles. Now, the Colts still have to get a deal done with Daniel Jones for him to be back. He is an impending free agent. But how do you view the charge to replicate that success? Is that realistic for these guys? Is it achievable for them to reach that, to then achieve the goals set out by Carlie Irsay-Gordon for them?
It's a great question, because I think what solid teams do, what teams with good, with like I said, I feel like I use the word a lot, but like with good process do, is they think about windows of time and they try to understand what it will take to maximize certain windows of time or to completely restart in other windows of time. When I think they look at this roster right now, and I think a lot of people around the league would agree, this is still it's not a rebuild, you know. It's like it's a ready to win roster. And you probably have a couple, maybe a year or 2 years left on some of the more veteran players who've been high level contributors on this roster. You probably have to get younger and fresher and very quickly in other parts of this roster. But you know that this offense and many elements of this defense are ready to win games. And so then you think about what takes that type of roster, what pieces are still missing. Well, the quarterback question looms so large. I think that a huge and probably understated element of feeling like this can work and they can push one more year of this particular team build phase to see how much it's got in the tank. A huge element of this is that Riley Leonard looked so good when he played. And I think having a healthy Riley Leonard as maybe a spot starter early on in the season, because you do not want to rush Daniel Jones back from an Achilles. You see it with Kirk Cousins. You see you're stuck in the pistol all day, every day. You don't want to be stuck there. And like you see this empirical proof that you should not be rushing these quarterbacks back from that quickly, even though the medical process is like a miracle now with how fast that you can get these things to heal. But I think Riley playing at the level that he did, you at least see, okay, you can spot September, right? Like you can see, you can get an on-ramp going for if Daniel Jones does return. Like you could see the vision of this team being at least at the the middle of the league, if not higher because of the talent elsewhere on the roster. And then you're trying to just maximize out however you can this roster and this I guess this era of the team build that they're in. And if it works, then again, you're competing at a high level. And if it doesn't work, then you know you have to rebuild. And you have until, in my opinion, the trade deadline that year to really understand, can we do this year? Or is it time to start moving players and recouping assets? And at that point, is it time to start having another conversation with the GM and the head coach?
That's a really, really interesting perspective there. Certainly for Colts fans to think about as we kind of move forward here. Jourdan, your national perspective on this has been fascinating. I want to get you out of here on this. As you will, over the course of your career now, I'm sure, keep tabs on, the growth that Carlie Irsay-Gordon has as owner and CEO of this franchise. What maybe excites you about the long-term direction that the Colts can take? This isn't about 2026 or 2028 or 2030. It's a much more broad question about the direction of the Indianapolis Colts under Carlie Irsay-Gordon. What maybe interests you or excites you about following that story over decades?
Yes, and I love that question because here's like a theory of mine, right? Like, I think this is legit. I think this is the real deal. I know a lot of other people around the league think that as well. But I know that there's something deeper here that is prioritized, especially with Carlie and Kaylin and Casey, is being a new model of what a franchise can look like and being competitive and getting back into the conversation every year, right? But not losing your soul and not becoming this monolithic organization, staying, as she says, in a living organism, keeping people said hi to me in the hallways. Like yeah, we can joke it's a Midwest thing or whatever, but like being in there, everyone knew each other. People were kind to each other. People spoke to each other in an important way, and also in the locker room as well. And keeping that like family feeling, keeping that feeling of like we are in this together and we are alive and we are experiencing this and we're looking and facing hard things together and all of that, making it feel less like a job and more like a purpose for everybody in the building while still becoming this like competitive monolith on the, in terms of the productivity of the organization. I think that is a nearly impossible goal to set, to reach. But if someone's going to do it, I do feel like she is the right person to do it.
Let me just say, Jourdan, to someone who does work in this building, I think you encapsulated it perfectly. Like, it feels like working here is almost kind of like a calling sometimes, and it feels less like a job and more like, something I love that I get to do. And I'm just the team writer and the podcast guy and the stadium PA announcer. Like, I'm not on the field down there with the guys or coaching, and I think that permeates not just the football side but the business side. So again, you did a fantastic job on the story. This is a fantastic conversation. Before I get you out of here, just let our listeners and viewers know where they can consume all the great stuff that you are doing.
Yeah, keep up with me on The Athletic. All the writing is there. And then Greg Rosenthal and I co-host NFL Daily, wherever you get your podcasts, and we live on NFL Network as well. Yeah, it was fun. I have to say that idea of purpose, that was something that she spoke of a lot through the course of our conversation. And we only have so much time on this planet. So, what are you going to do with that time? And I thought that was, you could feel it in all phases of the building. And that's why it was important to me, and not to take too much more of your time, JJ, but like, you got to be somewhere to feel that. It's a lot. Mm-hmm. It's really easy for, I think, people, including myself, to talk about it on the outside and think we know what's really going on the inside. And I think when losing happens and frustrations are high, it is really easy to be results oriented and to look at results and think that we know process. But for me, the reason why I lobbied to spend that much time in the building was to test this theory, to see if it was real or not. I'm glad it was real. Otherwise, I would have had to write a very different story. but it was really one of the altering stories that I've worked on in my career. I could say that definitively.
That's great. That is a great way to close out this conversation. From The Athletic, Jourdan Rodrigue, thank you for joining me here on The Colts Show. The Colts Show is presented by Microsoft Surface Copilot Plus PC, where every day is game day. Greatness in the NFL starts long before kickoff. It's built in the quiet hours of preparation and the discipline to turn insights into action. The Indianapolis Colts rely on Microsoft Surface Copilot Plus PCs to turn preparation into performance. With real-time AI-powered insights right on the sideline, coaches and players can make smarter, faster decisions when it matters most. From the field to the front office, Microsoft Surface Copilot Plus PCs are transforming how the Indianapolis Colts prepare, strategize, and win. This isn't just about football, it's about unlocking potential wherever the game is played. Hey Colts fans, the Colts Sunday night 7-on-7 series is returning. Boys tackle and dedicated girls flag can train in an open gym format across select Sundays this winter. Presented by Forte Sports Medicine and Orthopedics with support from Gatorade and the Gridiron Foundation. Sign up now at Colts.com/SN7on7. All right, thanks again to Jourdan Rodrigue from The Athletic for coming on the pod this week. Great conversation there. If you missed some of our podcasts leading up to this one, we had some really good conversations with guys like Adam Vinatieri, Mike Chappell. As you can guess, those are discussions based around the Hall of Fame. That announcement's going to come later in February as to who makes the Hall of Fame. But if you missed that episode with Chap, it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks here. If Adam Vinatieri gets in, if Reggie Wayne gets in, sounds like both those guys have a bit of an uphill challenge to get into the Hall of Fame. Really great episode there. And then Adam Vinatieri, he was awesome. What a storyteller he is. I would encourage you to go check out that podcast. It went out the day of Monday Night Football in December, right before Christmas. So go check that out on your feed if you haven't already. We're going to go back to our usual cadence next week. I'll be back on Tuesday with a season recap and off-season preview episode. And then Jack Doyle's going to be back with Matt Taylor on Thursday with a podcast looking back at the 2025 season and ahead to the 2026 off-season as well. If you like this episode, if you like all of our episodes, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can subscribe to us on YouTube by subscribing to the Colts or our individual podcast feeds as well. Thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you for watching this episode of The Colts Show presented by Microsoft Surface Copilot Plus PC. Talk to you next week. So long.